The cemetery was quiet that morning, unnervingly so. Mist floated just above the rows of weather-worn tombstones like a gauzy veil, muffling every sound. Emily Carter, aged 10, gripped a small bouquet of daisies as she walked alongside her mother Mary. They were headed to her father's grave, like they did every year on the same day, May 19th, the day he died in a car accident. Emily had been just 5 then. She barely remembered him, except for the warm smile in the photo that sat on her nightstand and the silver locket around her neck, a gift he had given Mary before Emily was born. They stopped at the headstone, Daniel Carter, 1971-2004. Beloved father, husband, and son. Mary knelt beside it, her hands trembling slightly as she traced her fingers over the carved letters. Emily stood nearby, silently watching her mother, then stepped forward. "I want to put them there myself," Emily said quietly, holding up the daisies. Mary gave her a nod and a sad smile. "Just stay close, honey." Emily walked about 10 steps away to a smaller adjacent plot where she remembered another name she thought her dad once mentioned. She knelt, lowered the daisies to the base of the headstone, and adjusted the ribbon tied around the stems. When Mary looked up moments later, Emily was gone. At first, she didn't panic. The girl might have wandered a little farther. Kids were curious. She called out her daughter's name, expecting an echo or a giggle from behind a tree. Nothing. She called again, and again. Within minutes, her voice had risen to a scream. "Emily!" The cemetery caretaker arrived after hearing her cries. He helped search the grounds, then others joined. Police were called. A search team was organized. Drones and dogs, a full perimeter sweep. But it was as if the earth had swallowed Emily whole. There were no signs of a struggle, no dropped locket, no footprints leading away, no witnesses. Emily Carter had disappeared in the middle of the day, in an open space, with her mother standing barely 10 steps away, and she was never seen again. 15 years passed. Mary returned every year on May 19th. With lilies now, not daisies. She refused to move away from the town, refused to change her phone number, refused to stop hoping. The world had forgotten Emily. News cameras stopped showing up after the first month. Her name faded from the headlines. Her photo, once pinned on every bulletin board and telephone pole in Green Hollow, was now curled at the edges and faded by the sun. Most assumed the worst. Some even whispered that maybe Mary had something to do with it. But no one ever said it to her face. Then, on an overcast afternoon in August 2019, a cemetery worker named Jorge Ramirez was assigned to replace a crumbling headstone near the back edge of the cemetery. It was part of a long overdue restoration funded by the Historical Society. As he dug out the old base and cleared the soil, his shovel struck something metallic. He reached down and brushed away the dirt. A small, rusted, silver locket lay there, half buried, sealed by years of untouched soil. It was oval-shaped, delicate, and had 3 faint initials etched onto the back. ECC, Emily Claire Carter. Jorge opened it. Inside, he found a faded photo of a smiling man in military uniform with a little girl perched on his knee. The glass covering was cracked, but the image was clear enough. And then Jorge noticed the dried, reddish stains along the inside hinge. Blood. He froze. Investigators were called immediately. Forensics arrived within the hour. They confirmed the blood was human, but hadn't yet confirmed to whom it belonged. The most disturbing part: the soil around the locket showed no signs of recent disturbance. It had been there a very long time, likely before the headstone above it even began to crumble. The question that haunted everyone wasn't just why the locket was there, it was when it had been buried. 15 years of silence. And now, one small object buried beneath a forgotten grave had just reopened a case that had never truly closed. Mary Carter hadn't heard from the police in nearly a decade, so when she got the call, her hand trembled before she even picked it up. "This is Detective Hannah Lorne with Green Hollow PD. Mrs. Carter, we've recovered something from the cemetery that we believe belongs to your daughter." Mary didn't speak. She couldn't. Her mind raced through scenarios, but when she finally found her voice, all she could manage was a breathless, "What did you find?" At the station, Mary sat across from Detective Lorne, who gently slid a small, clear evidence bag across the table. Inside, slightly rusted, was Emily's locket. Mary's hands flew to her mouth as her eyes filled with tears. She hadn't seen it since the day Emily vanished. "She never took it off," Mary whispered. "It was a gift from her father. She wore it every day, even to bed." "We found it buried about a foot underground beneath an old grave marker," Lorne explained. "It's been down there a long time, possibly since around the time Emily disappeared." Mary stared at the locket as if it might speak to her. "There was no digging that day. No one touched the earth." "That's what we thought, too," the detective replied. "But this locket, it wasn't dropped. It was buried." Mary's memory reeled. "That doesn't make sense. She was with me the whole time." Lorne leaned forward. "Can you walk me through that day again? Every detail." Mary closed her eyes. "We brought daisies, Emily's favorite. She asked if she could lay them herself. I told her to stay close. She walked 10 steps away, just 10, to place them beside another grave. I looked down for maybe a second, just to clean the stone. When I looked up, she was gone." "Did you see anyone else nearby?" "There were other families, a few older men, but nobody close enough to be a threat." She paused. "She wouldn't have gone far. Emily hated getting lost." Detective Lorne made notes. "Was there anyone working at the cemetery that day? Any staff or contractors?" Mary shook her head slowly, then stopped. "Wait, they were doing some kind of maintenance, I think. I remember a truck parked near the back fence, orange cones, a man with a clipboard. But I didn't pay attention. I was grieving." Lorne underlined something in her notebook. "The cemetery underwent partial renovation in 2004. That matches. We'll look into the maintenance logs. We want to identify every person who had access to that area around the time of her disappearance." Mary reached for the Locket's bag again. "You said there was blood." "Yes," Lorne said. "Dried, very old. But it's not Emily's blood type. We've confirmed that much already." Mary's eyebrows knit. "Then whose is it?" "We don't know yet, but it changes everything. This isn't just a child who vanished. It's possible there was someone else involved, someone who got hurt." Mary sat in silence. The locket stared back at her like an open wound. She felt as if the floor beneath her feet was shifting. For 15 years the narrative had been simple, tragic, but simple. Her daughter vanished without a trace. Now there was a trace, and it had been under their feet the whole time. Back at the precinct, Detective Lorne pulled old files from storage. Thick manila folders yellowed with age. One held cemetery renovation records from 2004. Within it, names of contracted workers, city permits, and hand-scrawled notes from a now-retired groundskeeper. Among the pages was a log entry from May 20th, 2004, the day after Emily disappeared. It read, "Weather dry. Crew finished shifting Kane's marker back 5 feet. Gravesite 72B realigned due to sinkage. Subcontractor Merrick handled fill-in." Lorne froze. That name, Merrick, hadn't come up in the original investigation. She checked the original police interviews. No mention, no questioning, no address on file. "Who are you?" she murmured aloud. Detective Lorne circled the name and pulled her phone out. She called records. "I need to know everything you can find on a D. Merrick. Possibly worked cemetery maintenance in 2004. Any permits, contracts, driver's license, anything." Then she stared at the locket again. A child's necklace, buried beneath someone else's grave, stained with someone else's blood, and the earth had been undisturbed all this time. The Green Hollow Cemetery hadn't changed much in 15 years. The trees were older, the stones more worn, but the layout was the same: winding gravel paths, crooked fences, and quiet grief. Yet one thing had changed recently. The quiet was now under surveillance. Following the discovery of Emily Carter's locket, a full investigative team returned to the grounds. Crime scene tape roped off a section near the grave where it had been found, and forensics specialists combed the area with metal detectors and soil-sifting equipment. So far, the earth yielded no more secrets. Detective Hannah Lorne stood at the edge of the caution tape, flipping through the cemetery's 2004 renovation log again. The same name stared back at her. Merrick. He hadn't been mentioned in any of the original files from Emily's disappearance. No interviews, no background check, nothing. How does someone help reshape half the cemetery and leave no trail behind? She muttered to herself. She needed help. Someone who remembered the grounds back then. Someone whose memory might fill in the gaps where paper trails failed. 2 hours later, Detective Lorne sat across from George Fell, the cemetery's retired head groundskeeper. He was in his late 70s now, living in a modest home just outside of town, his fingers stiff with arthritis, but his mind still sharp. "You were in charge of the grounds in 2004? Lorne asked gently. "Damn near 30 years, George said, sipping coffee slowly. "Retired in 2010. The land doesn't forget, but people do." She handed him a printout of the logbook entry. "Do you remember anything about this subcontractor, Merrick?" George stared at the page for a long time. "That name, it rings a bell, but not someone from my crew. Might have been hired through a third-party outfit we used back then. City was pushing us to finish repairs before Memorial Day. They sent us help." "You never reported him in the investigation." "They never asked," George said flatly. "Cops didn't seem interested in the landscaping records. They figured the kid ran off, or worse." Lorne pressed. "Do you remember what Merrick looked like?" George furrowed his brow. Tall, thin, wore this ratty canvas jacket every day. Never talked much, always working alone. Creeped out the others, to be honest. One of the guys said he caught Merrick just standing still in the shadows, behind the chapel, not doing a damn thing for over 10 minutes, like he was listening to something only he could hear. That gave Lorne a chill. George continued. "He only worked a couple weeks, filled in sunken graves, shifted some markers. One day he just stopped showing up." "Do you remember when that was?" George paused. "Late May, right around when that little girl disappeared." Lorne's throat tightened. "Did you ever report that?" "I told my boss," George said, his voice tight. "He told me not to stir trouble. Don't go accusing some poor contractor of kidnapping without proof," he said. "We don't need a lawsuit." So I kept quiet. Lorne sat in silence, the air between them growing heavier. "Do you remember what he was working on? Any specific graves?" George nodded slowly. "Yeah, Plot 72B. There was a shift in the soil. I remember because we had to move a headstone back 5 feet. It was Kane's plot." That name again. Kane. Lorne flipped to her notes. Robert Kane. Janitor. Died 2004. Buried just days before Emily vanished. "Did Merrick fill in the ground after the headstone move?" she asked. "He did it alone. Told me he preferred to work in silence. I figured he was just odd." She stood. "I need to find that man, Mr. Fell." George looked at her with haunted eyes. "If he had something to do with that little girl, I hope you bury him beneath that same dirt." Back at the station, Lorne had her assistant run deeper background checks. The name Merrick wasn't yielding much. No Social Security hits, no tax records under cemetery subcontractors. Then, finally, a breakthrough. An old invoice filed under a disbanded contracting company from the early 2000s. Douglas Merrick, hired under emergency terms. No photo ID on file. Address a P.O. box, now closed. No next of kin. A ghost. But then something new surfaced. An obituary. Not for Merrick, for Robert Kane. Buried May 15th, 2004. Just 4 days before Emily Carter disappeared. Lorne pulled his records. Kane had worked as a janitor at Lincoln Elementary, Emily's school. No surviving family. No visitors logged at his funeral. Nothing but a shallow obituary paid for by the school board. She clicked on the school's archived files. The digitized inventory showed that when Kane died, his belongings were boxed and stored until 2006, then transferred to county archives. It was a long shot, but Lorne called to have them pulled because if Robert Kane had worked at Emily's school, and his grave was the one under which her locket had been found, then someone had buried a piece of her beneath the body of a man she may have feared. The locket was no longer just a trinket. After being carefully extracted from beneath a decades-old grave, it had become the center of a reopened missing persons case that had haunted Green Hollow for 15 years. Forensic analyst Karen Yu stared at it under magnification, the cracked silver glinting under lab lights. Inside the tiny frame were two images, one of a smiling 10-year-old girl and the other of a solemn man in uniform, Emily and her father. But it was the dried substance inside the hinge that mattered most now. Yu leaned back from her workstation and tapped her report. "It's blood," she confirmed. Detective Hannah Lorne stood in the lab doorway. "Human? Yes, but here's the twist." Yu swiveled the monitor toward her. "It's type AB negative." Lorne froze. Emily Carter's blood type was O positive. Then who the hell bled into her locket? Yu shrugged. Whoever it was, they bled a long time ago. Trace degradation matches a sample at least 15 years old. But here's the kicker. She clicked open another tab. I cross-checked with old hospital records. In 2004, there was only one emergency room admission in Green Hollow with AB negative blood. A man who showed up late at night on May 16th with a deep gash on his hand. Said it was a work accident. Refused to give a full name. Signed in as D. Merrick. Lauren's pulse picked up. "We have medical records?" Yu nodded. "Minimal, but yes. And he was treated at County General." Same night Emily disappeared. She was gripping the back of a chair now. How does someone slice their hand, lose blood inside a child's locket, and then vanish from public record? Yu frowned. That locket didn't end up under that grave by accident. It was placed, carefully, before the soil ever settled. Lorne turned away, her thoughts spinning. That grave, Robert Kane's, had been buried days before Emily vanished. The locket had been found just under the surface, which meant it had been buried after the coffin went in, but before the headstone had fully settled. Someone had placed it there. Someone with access. Someone like Merrick. Detective Lorne returned to her office and opened the archival materials pulled from the school board. A nondescript cardboard box with a faded shipping label. Lincoln. Elementary storage. Kane. Custodial. Inside, she found old keyrings, a cracked thermos, an employee badge, and a dusty plastic folder of disciplinary forms. One document was dated just 2 months before Kane's death. Incident report, Emily Carter, March 2004. Teacher, Ms. Langley. Concern, Androgen. Emily expressed repeated fear of a man in the hallway who stares too long. She refused to go to the bathroom alone. Parents notified. No further action taken. Lauren's hands tightened on the page. No one had mentioned this. It wasn't in the original case file. She reached for the keyring. 6 keys, 4 standard, 2 larger brass ones. One of them was labeled in faint ink. Storage shed, GH, Green Hollow. The cemetery. The shed behind the chapel had long since been boarded shut and marked for demolition. No one had touched it in over a decade. Lorne checked her watch. She could make it before dusk. The sun was low over the cemetery when Detective Lorne arrived. The shed stood in the rear lot, half swallowed by vines and moss, its windows opaque with dirt. The door was sealed with a rusted padlock. She pulled Kane's key from the ring. It turned with a heavy click. The shed door groaned open, sending a gust of stale, dead air outward. Inside, the light from her flashlight cut through dust and shadows. Against one wall were long-forgotten gardening tools, broken chairs, and rotting boxes. But it was what sat in the center of the room that made Lauren's heart seize. A small, folded chair, a child's hair barrette on the floor, and a single white sneaker, the same brand Emily had worn in her missing persons poster. Lorne didn't breathe. She stepped forward slowly. The sneaker was scuffed, its laces frayed. Beside it, taped to the back of a support beam, was a faded photograph. Black and white, from a security camera. It showed the cemetery's back gate, and in it, a child walking hand in hand with a tall man in a canvas jacket. Emily, and someone no one ever bothered to question. The shed, forgotten and overlooked for years, wasn't just a storage unit. It was a waiting room, and someone had used it. Detective Hannah Lorne didn't sleep the night they opened the shed. She sat in her office, replaying the security camera image over and over. The little girl, unmistakably Emily Carter, walking beside a man whose face was turned just enough to stay a mystery. The frame was grainy, taken from a black and white security feed pointed at the cemetery's rear fence. No one even remembered that camera existed until it surfaced in an old equipment inventory. It had been disconnected a year after Emily vanished. The timestamp, May 16th, 2004, 5:42 p.m. Emily had disappeared around 5:30. The photo was likely taken just minutes after she left her mother's side. She had gone with him willingly. And that might have been the most chilling part of all. Detective Lorne had little to go on when she reopened the subcontractor lead. Dee Merrick had vanished after 2004, but the trail wasn't completely cold. Deep background checks finally yielded a connection. Douglas Merrick Sr., deceased in 2009. No listed children, but a brother now living in a rural part of Montana. She made the call. At first, Arthur Merrick didn't want to speak to her. "I don't talk about Doug," he said bluntly. "He wasn't someone I liked knowing." Lorne kept her tone calm. "I'm not calling about family drama. I'm calling about a child who vanished in 2004. Your brother might have worked at Green Hollow Cemetery. I believe he may have spoken to her shortly before she disappeared." The line went quiet. "Is this about that Carter girl?" Arthur finally asked. "Yes." A long breath. "Come see me, but don't come alone." Arthur Merrick lived in a cluttered cabin deep in the woods, far from the grid. When Lorne arrived with a partner, he was already waiting on the porch, a coffee can in hand, full of cigarette butts. His hands were rough. His eyes carried decades of regret. "I haven't talked about Doug in almost 15 years, he said, ushering them inside. "And I didn't attend his funeral. I barely believed he was dead until the call from the hospital." "What happened to him?" Lorne asked. Arthur stared at the floor. "He bled out. Wrist wound. Said it was an accident, but I always figured it was suicide." "Do you know why?" Arthur was silent for a moment. Then he walked to a storage cabinet and pulled out a box, old, water-damaged, full of loose photos, letters, and scraps. "He started getting weird after our mom died," Arthur said. "Got real quiet, started working these odd jobs no one else wanted. Cemeteries, waste plants, places where no one asked questions." Lorne leafed through the box, pausing on a photo of a man, tall, gaunt, wearing a weathered canvas jacket. No smile, just an expression that made the hair on her arms stand up. "That's him," Arthur said. "He hated cameras. That one's from our cousin's wedding, only photo I've got." Lorne slid it into an evidence sleeve. "What do you remember about 2004? She asked. Arthur hesitated. "He called me once. It was late at night, said something had happened, said he saw something he wasn't supposed to, but I think it was the other way around." "What do you mean?" "He told me he'd been working at some graveyard, said he had to move a stone, said he found something in the dirt. And then he said, 'She gave me flowers.'" Lorne's pulse skipped. "Emily was holding daisies when she disappeared," she said. Arthur nodded slowly. "That's what he said too. Daisies, over and over." "What did you think he meant?" Arthur looked ashamed. "I thought he was drunk, or stoned, or making it up." He pulled out a folded envelope. "This showed up a month before he died. No return address. I think he mailed it to himself and forgot about it." Inside was a single Polaroid. It showed the inside of a small shed, the same one Lorne had stepped into just 2 days earlier. Same folding chair, same concrete floor. But in this photo, there was a child's shadow cast on the wall. Emily. The photo had a smear across it. Something dark, almost like blood. On the back, written in jagged, frantic letters, "She cried for him, not for me." Lorne didn't speak for a long moment. The silence said more than any report ever could. She looked up at Arthur. "Thank you. You've just opened a door no one ever wanted to knock on." He shook his head slowly. "You think he did it?" Lorne didn't answer, but in her gut she knew. The afternoon light fell through the grimy windows of the county archives, dust motes drifting in golden shafts. Detective Hannah Lorne spread a series of brittle documents across the table, cross-referencing burial records, maintenance logs, and the cemetery's original maps. 15 years had passed, but something about the paperwork didn't add up. The file stamped 2005 was different, an addendum buried deep in the archives, filed quietly and with little fanfare. It documented a grave reassignment at Green Hollow Cemetery. Plot 72B, Robert Kane's resting place, had been marked as erroneously assigned and shifted to another location. The original headstone had been moved, but the records showed no follow-up inspection or exhumation. Lorne frowned. Why would a grave be reassigned without checking what lay beneath? The story began to take shape when Lorne brought in George Fell, the retired groundskeeper, back to the archives. He shuffled through the brittle maps, tracing his finger along faint lines. "I remember this," George said quietly. "When the city started digging around for renovations in 2005, there was confusion about the boundaries. Some graves were moved because the records were off, mostly older plots with faded inscriptions." Lorne nodded. "But no one went down and actually checked the soil? No exhumation?" George shook his head. "No. They moved the headstone, packed fresh dirt over, and hoped no one would notice." Her pulse quickened. The locket, the unmarked soil, the faded blood. Lorne pressed. If the locket was buried beneath the grave before the headstone was moved, then someone had to place it there before the reassignment. George's eyes darkened. Exactly, and that someone knew the grave was going to be moved, so they could bury something without anyone digging it back up. Why would they do that? George looked away, haunted. To hide a secret, to make sure it stayed buried. Literally. Further investigation revealed something even more disturbing. The cemetery's soil samples, taken during the 2005 reassignment, showed traces of two different bodies mixed in the same plot. Robert Kane's coffin was there, but so was something else. An unrecorded burial, hidden under the surface. The question was, who and why? Detective Lorne felt the weight of those unanswered questions pressing down on her as she returned to the crime scene. The grave above the locket was no longer just a resting place. It was a crime scene waiting to be unearthed. With official clearance, a forensic team began exhuming the grave. Each shovel of dirt was handled with reverence and fear, as if disturbing the earth would awaken something best left asleep. When the coffin was finally lifted, the team found Robert Kane's body, aged, peaceful, but with no sign of trauma. Beneath the coffin, carefully wrapped in a sealed container, was the second body, child. The skeletal remains belonged to a girl approximately 10 years old, Emily Carter. The ground beneath Green Hollow held its breath. The truth was no longer a shadow in the dark. It was buried in plain sight. Every year since 2004, Emily Carter's mother, Laura, had returned to the cemetery on the anniversary of her daughter's disappearance. The world had moved on, but Laura's heart remained rooted in Green Hollow, where she left lilies by her husband's grave and whispered a prayer for Emily. It was a ritual of hope and pain, the only connection she could maintain to a child who vanished without a trace. When Detective Hannah Lorne approached Laura for questioning, it was with a gentle purpose. The years had weathered Laura's face, but the loss had only sharpened her resolve. "I don't want to relive that day," Laura said softly, her eyes fixed on the ground. "But I want to know what happened to my daughter." Lorne handed her a faded photograph from the early days of the investigation, a grainy, black-and-white snapshot taken near the cemetery's back gate. It showed a young Emily smiling, standing in front of a headstone that didn't belong to her father. Laura's eyes widened. "That's not Dad's grave," she whispered. "I remember that day. We were looking for the right spot, but I must have taken the wrong path." Lorne nodded. The headstone was replaced years ago, but the name on it was never properly recorded. It belonged to a man named Robert Kane, a janitor at Emily's school. Laura's breath caught. "Robert Kane, I remember the name, but I never thought—" "Neither did anyone else," Lauren said. "But there's more. We found your daughter's locket buried beneath his grave, and when we exhumed the site, we found Emily's remains." Laura's hands trembled. Tears welled up, but she held them back. How is this possible?" Lauren reached out, placing a comforting hand on Laura's. "We're piecing it together. There's evidence suggesting someone close to the cemetery, someone who had access, might be involved." Laura's gaze hardened. "I'll do whatever it takes to find the truth." As Laura spoke, her eyes caught a detail in the crime scene photos she had been shown earlier. A small mark on the corner of a gravestone, almost invisible, a scratch or symbol etched in the stone. "I saw that before," she said, "but I thought it was just damage from weather." Lauren examined the photo again. The mark was deliberate, a rough carving resembling the letter M. "Could this be a clue?" Laura asked. "It might be," Lauren said. "It matches the initial of Douglas Merrick, the subcontractor who worked here during the renovations." The weight of that connection pressed heavily on both women. Meanwhile, investigators continued to unravel the tangled web of forgotten records, old grudges, and silenced voices. Every new detail raised more questions than answers. Who had moved the grave without proper inspection? Why had the locket been placed beneath the soil? And most importantly, who was the man in the canvas jacket? The answers lay buried beneath layers of time and silence. But Detective Lauren was determined to dig them up, no matter how painful. The photo Laura Carter had seen, the one showing Emily standing before the wrong headstone, became a crucial piece of the puzzle. Detective Hannah Lorne returned to the cemetery with a small team to examine the gravesite more closely. The headstone in the photograph had been replaced years ago, but the name it bore had been poorly recorded in the cemetery's logs: Robert Kane. Standing before the current marker, Lauren traced the engraved letters with her gloved fingers. The name was clear, but the dates were inconsistent with the records of the janitor who worked at Emily's school. Why would a grave be replaced with a headstone that doesn't match the original occupant? Lauren wondered aloud. The cemetery manager, a stoic man named Marcus, shrugged when confronted. Back then, records were a mess. Some graves were moved or consolidated, and mistakes were common. Nobody expected anyone to notice. Lauren's instincts told her there was more. Delving into the archives, Lauren found an obituary for the real Robert Kane. It detailed a quiet man, a janitor with no known family, who had worked at Lincoln Elementary for decades. The obituary made no mention of a family or any heirs, but hidden in the school's forgotten storage room was a box labeled with Kane's name, untouched since 2006. Inside, Lauren found personal belongings, old keys, faded photographs, and a small journal filled with cryptic notes. The handwriting was shaky but clear. One entry stood out: May 12, 2004. The girl. The flowers. She watches, but she doesn't see. They think I'm invisible, but I'm always here. The words sent a chill down Lauren's spine. Who was Kane watching? And what did he mean by "she watches"? Further investigation into the janitor's life revealed an unsettling fact. Robert Kane had an unreported history of mental illness and had been known to wander the cemetery grounds late at night, sometimes speaking to himself. Some colleagues described him as harmless, others as disturbing. No one, however, connected him to Emily's disappearance, until now. Lauren contacted Kane's former coworkers and neighbors. One elderly teacher recalled Emily mentioning she was scared of a man in the hallway at school, a comment dismissed at the time as childhood fear. Another neighbor reported hearing strange noises near the cemetery shed around the time Emily disappeared. The pieces were slowly coming together. But the biggest mystery remained. Why was Kane buried in the wrong place? And what happened to the original occupant of that grave? The cemetery's records were murky, but the answer lay somewhere beneath the earth, concealed by time, fear, and a secret someone had fought to keep hidden. The box of Robert Kane's belongings was a window into a life mostly ignored, a collection of forgotten memories dusted off and brought back to light by Detective Hannah Lorne. Among the faded photographs and worn keys, one item caught her attention: a small leather-bound notebook, its pages yellowed with age, but carefully preserved. Inside were dozens of entries, fragmented thoughts, odd observations, and cryptic scribbles that hinted at a man battling inner demons. One passage stood out. "She comes to me at night, the girl with flowers. She's scared, but she trusts no one. I can hear her whisper, calling out from beneath the stones." Lorne flipped through more pages, each revealing a growing obsession with a little girl who never left and walked between worlds. Had Robert Kane been protecting Emily, or had he been watching her for darker reasons? The keys in the box offered another clue. Among the collection was a small, rusty keychain with several keys. One matched the tool shed at Green Hollow Cemetery, the same shed investigators had found sealed since 2004. Lorne's team reopened the shed, this time with a more thorough search. Inside, they discovered remnants of makeshift furniture, faded children's drawings pinned to the walls, and a worn blanket tucked into a corner. The air was thick with dust and silence, a forgotten prison. Further forensic analysis on the shed's contents revealed traces of dried blood on the floor, matching the DNA found on Emily's locket. But the blood was not Emily's. It belonged to an unknown adult male. Who was this man? Why was his blood there? And how was Robert Kane connected? Interviews with former school staff revealed more disturbing hints. Kane had been dismissed shortly after Emily's disappearance under suspicious circumstances. There were rumors he had been confronted about inappropriate behavior, but no charges were ever filed. Had Kane's troubled past hidden a darker truth? Detective Lorne realized that solving Emily's case meant unraveling the complex layers of a man who had been both invisible and overlooked, someone who may have held the key to the mystery all along. The janitor's secret was buried deep beneath years of silence, and now it was beginning to surface. Detective Hannah Lorne stared at the small, rusty keyring they had pulled from Robert Kane's box of belongings. Among the jumble of old, corroded keys was one that caught her attention, a key that matched the lock on the old tool shed in Green Hollow Cemetery. The shed had been sealed off since 2004, shortly after Emily Carter's disappearance. The reason? Officially, no one could remember. The lock was rusted but intact, and the door groaned as the forensic team forced it open. Inside was a time capsule of neglect. Cobwebs draped over rusted wheelbarrows and gardening tools. A worn folding chair sat in the corner, and a patch of cracked concrete floor bore dark stains that the forensic team immediately collected for testing. What struck Lorne most was the faint, almost imperceptible smell, stale and metallic, a scent that seemed to cling to the air like a shadow. The blood samples taken from the shed floor matched the unknown adult male DNA found on Emily's locket, confirming the disturbing presence of someone else in the shed with Emily. Forensic experts found fibers of fabric consistent with a child's clothing embedded in the crevices of the wooden shelves. There were also traces of dirt from the cemetery soil, indicating prolonged presence, but no direct signs of struggle. Further searches of the shed revealed faded children's drawings taped to the walls, some signed with the initials EC. One drawing depicted a figure standing outside the cemetery gates, while another showed a small girl holding flowers next to a tall man wearing a hat. It was an eerie, silent story told through childish art, hints of Emily's final hours. Interviews with longtime cemetery staff uncovered more unsettling details. The janitor, Robert Kane, had been known to use the shed as his personal workspace. After Emily's disappearance, the shed was locked and left untouched, its key lost or forgotten. Until now. Why had Kane's key remained hidden in his personal effects, and why had no one thought to check the shed sooner? The discovery renewed hope for answers, but also brought a chilling realization. Emily's last minutes had been spent somewhere so close, yet so dark, hidden behind the locked doors of a forgotten shed. Detective Lorne knew the truth was within reach, but uncovering it would require confronting shadows that had lingered too long in the silence. Detective Hannah Lorne stood before the weathered door of the cemetery's old tool shed. The rusted lock had kept its secrets sealed tight for over a decade, but today, with Robert Kane's key in hand, the door was finally about to open. The hinges groaned as the door creaked ajar, releasing a musty scent, decades of dust, damp earth, and forgotten sorrow. Inside, the shed was cramped, just a few feet wide, cluttered with old gardening tools, broken wheelbarrows, and faded bags of soil. But more than the tools, what caught Lorne's attention were the walls, pinned with tattered, childlike drawings and scribbles. Many were signed simply E.C. and depicted flowers, trees, and a small figure standing next to a tall man wearing a hat. Lorne's breath caught. These were not just drawings. They were a silent testimony of a child's last days, left hidden in a forgotten corner. A thin layer of dirt coated the floor, disturbed only by faint scuff marks and a patch of dried blood. Forensic teams carefully collected samples, confirming that the blood was not Emily's, but belonged to an unidentified adult male. In a shadowed corner beneath a loose floorboard, Lorne discovered a hidden bundle wrapped in old cloth. Inside were photographs and letters, correspondence from Robert Kane, revealing a man tormented by loneliness and a strange fixation on Emily. One letter, dated days before Emily's disappearance, read, "She trusts me in a way no one else does. They'd never understand. I must keep her safe, no matter the cost." The words sent a chill through Lorne's veins. Outside the shed, footprints led toward the cemetery's oldest section, the very place where the grave had been reassigned. The trail, faint and nearly erased by time, hinted at a desperate journey, one that ended beneath the cold earth. Detective Lorne realized the shed was not just a storage space. It was a silent witness, holding the final moments of a girl whose story had been buried for far too long. The truth was close, too close, and someone was still watching from the shadows. Detective Hannah Lorne stood at the edge of the freshly exhumed grave, her breath misting in the cool morning air. The soil had been disturbed once again, not by nature, but by the hands of those seeking long-buried secrets. For years, the community had mourned Emily Carter without answers. But now, after following the winding trail through forgotten records, cryptic letters, and the sealed tool shed, the pieces of the puzzle were finally aligning. The forensic team's analysis had confirmed what many feared. Emily's remains lay beneath the grave of Robert Kane, the janitor whose life had been shrouded in silence and pain. The locket buried with her, stained with blood, told a story no one had dared to tell. But the blood was not Emily's. It belonged to the man who had betrayed her trust. Interviews with surviving relatives and old colleagues revealed a dark truth. Douglas Merrick, the subcontractor who worked at the cemetery during the renovations, had been involved in a cover-up. Merrick had been fired shortly after the disappearance for unexplained absences and aggressive behavior. Witnesses recalled seeing him near the shed the day Emily vanished, but his name was never connected to the case. Confronted with evidence, Merrick confessed to restraining Emily in the shed after she had stumbled upon something she shouldn't have seen, a hidden space beneath the cemetery where bodies and secrets were buried in error. In a panic, Merrick had concealed Emily's body beneath the misplaced grave, hoping to hide his crime behind the confusion of renovations and misfiled records. Justice moved swiftly. Merrick was charged and convicted, bringing a measure of peace to a family that had lived in torment for over a decade. Laura Carter, standing beside her daughter's grave for the first time in 15 years, finally found a semblance of closure. But the story of Emily Carter remained a chilling reminder. Sometimes the darkest secrets are hidden not in the shadows of strangers, but in the places we think we know best. And the past, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of coming back to light.